Things that people think about me don't frustrate me. What frustrates me is the kind of lethargy in this country, the lack of a desire to change things. Both my successors and my predecessors have not been prepared to do genuinely big stuff in number 10 because they're scared of being attacked or being removed. We were facing a massive backlash from people who don't want things to change. And a lot of those people are in the Conservative Party. The problem wasn't the policies. The issue was...
Liz, thank you so much for joining me. It's such a pleasure to have you in the studio.
It's great to be here.
Now, I would love to start. It's a little bit unfair, but I think it's actually important, which is when people think of you, people always have a perception. What do you think people get wrong about you?
I don't think things that people think about me don't frustrate me. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not what motivates me. I don't care what they think about me, to be honest. What frustrates me is that the kind of lethargy in this country, the lack of a desire to change things, and the fact that we're in decline. That's what frustrates me. But people can think about me what they like.
Why do you think we have this lethargy and lack of desire to change? It's interesting, when we had Kemi on the show, she said, there's this doom loop, especially for young people, that we tell them, oh, it's bad, and everyone just kind of believes it. Why do you think we have this lethargy and lack of energy?
Well, I think it just gets smothered. It gets smothered. So I think as a country, for probably at least 100 years, we've been headed in the wrong direction. We have been... there's been more and more central control, less ability to actually get things done. And that obviously has an effect on the national psyche. And you could say, which bit comes first, the chicken or the egg? But the fundamental point is, it is hard to get things done. People who try and change things tend to get blamed rather than recognize what they're doing. And if you compare it to the culture in the US, which I think is a better example of a entrepreneurial culture, there is more of a kind of desire for people to show initiative. Mm-hmm. And I often think the US is sometimes the people with get up and go left Britain and went to the US, and sometimes we were left with some of the people who just like stopping things and blocking things.
Why do you think it's hard to get things done in the UK? Is it a case where we have too much government intervention?
We've got too much government. The government's too big. It's 45% of our GDP is the government. And that doesn't even account for all the different ways that government exercise control over the private sector. So you've got the Bank of England exercising control over the banks. You've got the Green New Deal, or whatever it's called, exercising control over the energy industry. So you've got all of these tentacles, which essentially makes those industries kind of compliant, and they're part of that overall culture. And the number of businesses which are genuinely kind of self-starting and entrepreneurial has been in decline for quite a long time.
Do you think the UK is open for business? I think countries like...
Well, obviously isn't at the moment. I mean, people are leaving to do business. We know that.
We had Peter Carl on the show, though, who said, hey, I'm bringing tech companies in hand over fist. We are...
the numbers say the opposite. They say that millionaires and billionaires are leaving Britain. They say that all the big tech companies are now in the United States. And by the way, this isn't just a British problem. It's true across Europe as well. We know that's not true.
You mentioned the Bank of England and the Treasury. I actually spoke to Jacob about this, and he was like, we should get rid of the Treasury. It's useless. How do you feel about the right role for the Bank of England and the Treasury, and what should it be instead?
What needs to happen are two different things. One is that all of the officials that work for the government need to be able to be hired and fired by ministers. So this is a really important point. So the Chancellor needs to be able to determine the senior people in the Treasury. And if they're not good enough, or if they've got the wrong ideas, the Chancellor should be able to hire and fire them. That's a really important principle.
And you're not now?
The second, no. That's why it's called a permanent civil service. I mean, it started with the Northcote Trevelyan report in the 1850s, which I think is quite similar to when you look at when Britain started going downhill, that we got this permanent bureaucracy that can't be removed. I mean, you've seen Yes Minister and Sir Humphrey. It's like that now, but it's on steroids because Tony Blair made it a lot worse and made it a lot more unaccountable. But so that's one thing that has to change. But the second thing is that control of spending should be taken out of the Treasury and given to the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister should be making decisions about how budgets are allocated. Can you imagine being the chief executive of a company and not being able to make decisions about where you spent the money in the company? You wouldn't accept that, would you? And the Treasury should be responsible for monetary policy. So it should have control again of the Bank of England. We shouldn't have this unaccountable body that just lets inflation rip. And the Treasury should be responsible for things like debt and taxation, but it shouldn't be responsible for spending. That should be the remit of the Prime Minister. And that's exactly what the President in the United States does with the Office of Management and Budget.
When we think about then the role of the Treasury and the role of the Bank of England and its relationship with the Prime Minister today, just so people understand, what is that relationship? So the Prime Minister does not have control of spending in any way. He advises Treasury. How does that work?
So how it works is the Chancellor is responsible for the budget, which is how much is spent and how much is taxed. And the Bank of England is responsible for monetary policy, so setting interest rates. It used to be the case before Tony Blair that the Chancellor set interest rates and that he was also responsible for monetary policy. That's now been hived off. So politicians don't have any decision-making power over that. But on tax and spend, the decision is made by the Chancellor. However, the people who actually do all the work and do all the execution are the bureaucrats. And the Chancellor can't hire and fire those bureaucrats. So it's a bit like you being in charge of the budget here, but the person working for you hasn't been hired by you. You can't change them. And they say, this is what I think we should do. And you say, I don't like it. And they come back with, this is what I think we should do. And you say, I don't like it. And that process goes on for quite a long time. What has happened since 2010 is the Office of Budget Responsibility was invented by George Osborne, and they essentially say what the budget will achieve. So if you say, I'm putting up corporation tax to 25%, they'll say, great, that will bring in an extra £10 billion. But what happens is their forecasts have been shown to be wrong, and actually it hasn't brought in that extra money because people haven't set up businesses or they've decided to take their business overseas. It didn't bring in the money, but you're not the person that decides what the forecast is. So somebody else is determining your policy because there are things you can't do because the forecast says, well, that will result in Britain having huge amounts of debt, or that will result in us running out of money.
I think this is what non-doms, in particular, OBR did not fully account for how many people would leave. And that is why we're in a position where
But they never do. They got it wrong on corporation tax. They got it wrong on VA.
So should we just get rid of OBR then?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I was never in favour of it being introduced in the first place. We should get rid of the OBR. We should put the Bank of England back under Treasury control. And all of the officials need to be able to be hired and fired. So ministers are actually running their departments. At the moment, ministers do not run their departments. It's run by the bureaucrats.
The challenge I have with ministers today is none of them have actually run a business. And I think you can tell that when you look at some of the policies enacted by this government. It is not policy.
Which policies are you talking about?
I'm talking about anything from corporation tax. If you look at increasing national insurance, if you look at what they're doing to cap gains, if you look at what they're doing with entrepreneurs.
I can guarantee you all of those policies came from the bureaucracy. What happens is the Chancellor is given a menu. Mm-hmm. So you say to me, well, I want to spend an extra 10 billion on the National Health Service. You're the Chancellor, I'm the bureaucrat. I give you a list of all the things you could do. well, do you want to raise corporation tax? This could get you 10 billion. Do you want to raise VAT? Do you want to put VAT on private schools? And you just tick and cross which ones you want.
Is it literally like that?
Yes, literally. There's just a list. But then you might say to me, well, actually, bureaucrat Truss, I don't agree that putting VAT on private schools is going to raise 250 million. And I'm like, well, sorry, that's my model and that's what it says. You just have to decide between these options. And you might say to me, well, I don't like any of those options. Please, can you model what the effect would be of abolishing inheritance tax? Because you think that is going to actually result in more money coming into the country because people won't be leaving because they'll be able to pass on their estate to their kids. I'm sorry, I'll just say, I'm sorry, that's going to cost you 8 billion to do that. So that's not going to help you raise money for the NHS. You cannot change those numbers. So
when I had Peter Carl on the show, he was like, I get it, your frustration about, cap gains or income tax or whatever these may be, Harry, but I have to do something. We have to pay for it in some way and we have to change. If I were to say to you, here's your menu of options, what would you have done to change that today? To pay for everything that one needs to pay for?
So first of all, he'll have no idea about what goes on in the Treasury. So he literally won't know. He will just be told lines to take by the Treasury when he does a media interview. He won't even know what the process is. I can guarantee that. It's only ministers in the Treasury who actually have seen this working, who know what it works. The point is that until you change the system and you say ministers are actually going to be coming up with the lists and making their own calculations, you will not change that mentality. And the answer is, what would I do? Well, it's what we sought to do in the mini budget. Get on with fracking to make energy costs cheaper for business. Get rid of regulations, all the EU regulations that should have been sunsetted. Put in place a lower, flatter tax, which will actually end up raising more revenue. Those are all the things you should do. But until the ministers with those views are actually in charge of the calculations, you're not going to be able to do it, because at the moment you've got a bureaucracy that love big government. They think the way to get things done is for the government to spend more money. They think the way to have a successful energy industry is to spend more money on it. They think the way to have a successful culture department is to spend more money on it. So you're never going to get anywhere without changing the system that we work in.
I love the term Trussonomics. Do you like that term?
I do, actually.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it's fantastic. But when we look at Trussonomics, or kind of the mini budget associated, it was obviously met with a lot of resistance. And what I was thinking was, is that a failure in terms of the strategy itself, or is that a failure in terms of execution and communication, do you think?
I don't think it's any of those things. So I think Trussonomics is right.
Yeah.
That the proposition that Britain is over-regulated, over-taxed, and our energy costs are too high, and the government is too big. I mean, that's just obviously true, Harry. Most people in Britain would agree. If you're on Doncaster High Street and you talk to businesses there, they will all agree with that. So the problem wasn't the policies. Now, as for communication of the policies, we've just agreed most people would agree with those propositions. The issue was there are the people who disagree are very loud, very effective, and they control a lot of the levers of power. So the Bank of England doesn't agree, because the Bank of England believes in net zero, DEI. They believe in, printing more money to create more money for public spending and stoking inflation. So they don't agree. And they have powerful levers because they control all kinds of things in the financial system. They're able to influence senior editors of papers, et cetera, et cetera. So what I think is more the case is that we were facing a massive backlash from people who don't want things to change. And a lot of those people are in the Conservative Party. They don't really want things to change. They want the status quo. A lot of them are in the public sector. A lot of them are in the mainstream media. They don't want things to change. So that's what we were facing. And
So
the
then-
lesson I've learnt from it is more, we need a bigger army of people to take these people on.
So then markets crash because the communication, because the Bank of England and people with powerful levers manipulate media to tell a story. Why is there like the financial implications then? Because
let's talk about this crash point. So the thing people highlight is how high gilt rates were.
Yeah.
Now the gilt rates are higher now under Rachel Reeves than they were in October 2022. But there is no media hysteria about that. People talk about so-called unfunded tax cuts. The fiscal package that Rachel Reeves announced in the spending review a few weeks ago was almost 3 times the size of the fiscal package in the mini budget. And that's according to the OBR's figures. That's not my figures. My figures would be very, very different because I believe in, that in the Laffer curve, I believe putting up taxes too high costs you money, not the other way around. I call it unfunded tax rises is what we've actually had. But even if you accept the OBR's poor modelling, our budget was much smaller in fiscal terms than Rachel Reeves' budget. The gilt rates are much higher now than they were in 2022. But because the Bank of England, the economic establishment, the Times newspaper are all on the side of big government, they're not creating the hysteria that they were in 2022. And so that's the point here.
What should be done then about the establishment that is very powerful, levered, has a lot of influence and control in this way? What should be done to change that in a new facing Britain?
So what needs to happen is, first of all, the tools need to be given back to Parliament to actually make change. So rather than the Bank of England governor deciding economic policy or the head of the Office of Budget Responsibility, it should be Parliament. That's point one. And what does that need? That needs the repeal of huge numbers of pieces of legislation. The Bank of England Act, the Constitutional Reform Act, the Climate Change Act, all of these acts that gave away power from Parliament need to be removed. I've already talked about the fact that ministers need to be able to hire and fire the people working for them. The basics of any organisation to be successful.
Do you think it's realistic for us to repeal all of those acts, given the slow-moving nature?
Well, would you rather Britain failed?
No, I wouldn't, but I'm just
Well, that's the choice.
But is it realistic?
Why not?
You know how government works better than I do.
All it needs, Harry, is for 350 good MPs to be in Parliament and vote for it. That's all it needs.
Do you think we have that today?
No, obviously not.
Do you think we have 100 good MPs today?
No. I'd probably count them on, a couple of hands. But the point is that we don't have that. So the question is, how do we get there? How do we get 350 good MPs?
Why do you think that is? Why do you think we don't have great people in policies?
So first of all, as I've said, all the power's been taken away from them. So it's part of the problem that the bureaucracy has accumulated all the power. So why wouldn't you be governor of the Bank of England, where you get very little public scrutiny, very little scrutiny of why was inflation in Britain so much higher than it was elsewhere? Everybody's blamed the Conservative government. They haven't blamed the Bank of England. Why not go and work there, have a lot of power, earn more money, rather than be an MP and be slagged off for things that you're not responsible for? So there's a massive incentive to go into the unelected bureaucracy rather than be on the firing line being blamed for things that you can't actually do anything about. And that's the bottom line, I think.
Do you think the Conservatives are unfairly blamed then for a huge amount that actually was taken out of their control?
No, I think the Conservatives are fairly blamed because we didn't change the system. And this is my point, is that you need 350 MPs, roughly, to change the system. until you do that, the role of an MP is not going to be a fulfilling role that people want to do. So the first thing is to change the system. Now, how do you get 350 MPs? And you don't just need the 350 MPs, you also need all the people working in the bureaucracy who can actually do a capable job as well. The answer is people have to step up. People who are in business, people who are running successful organizations in this country need to step up and get involved in politics and government. Because at the moment, what's happening is the people involved in politics and government are not delivering, and the country is just going from bad to worse.
It's funny, I speak to a lot of very capable friends of mine who I say the same to them. I said, why aren't we getting involved? And it's like, you get scrutiny, you get absolutely zero upside because you're not able to actually change anything, and like financially it's impacting your core business. Like, why would anyone do it?
But there has to be a point at time where there are 350 people who are prepared to change things, who are prepared to repeal the laws, who don't care that they're getting slagged off by the mainstream media or they're getting pilloried, and are prepared to see that through. That's what we need. You're asking me what's needed to change the country, and that is basically what we need.
Did you feel the weight of the scrutiny?
It is brutal, definitely. I am very motivated by achieving a goal. So I'm prepared to put up with anything, to be honest, without wishing more attacks by my critics. But for me, changing this country and making us great again is the objective. And I'm prepared to just put up with quite a lot of crap to do that. Both my successors and my predecessors have not been prepared to do genuinely big stuff in number 10 because they're scared of being attacked or being removed. My view is there's no point in being in politics if you don't want to change things.
Do you think you were too bold too quick?
No, I don't. I don't think so I've just talked about getting these 350 MPs elected. And this is what Trump is showing and what he's doing in the White House. If you don't act quickly, you completely lose any momentum you have. You've got to act quickly.
Do you think the US
I think
has
the
a
problem
structural...
was I didn't have enough support base in the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Too many of them wanted to go along with the status quo. I had, bigger than I realised opposition within the bureaucracy. That's what I now know that I didn't know in 2022, was just how much they would brief the media, leak everything, really try and destroy and sabotage what I was doing. I mean, the day before the mini budget, the Bank of England announced they were selling £40 billion worth of gilts. I mean, they were not trying to be helpful. And that's what
And that is because bureaucracy leak information ahead of time.
It's because when they don't like what a politician is trying to do, because it diminishes their power base, they will do everything they can to stop it. And this is why it's so important for a future government that actually wants to change things, is you do things straight away and you deal with a bureaucracy straight away, because otherwise they will simply sabotage plans. And you've seen from the last 40 years of governments that politicians haven't really been able to change the basic. The reason nobody has been able to change that is because there are powerful forces resisting that, and a strategy is needed to be able to take them on.
You said about moving fast there, just kind of going back because there's a lot to unpack there, but you said about moving fast. So one thing the US has that we don't, which I think is challenging, is a period of transition where you can do some form of planning. In the US, actually, I don't know what the exact number is, but say 60, 90 days, and you can plan for when you are in. And so day one, you can actually hit the ground running. We don't have that at all. It's kind of like you're thrust into the spotlight on day one.
That is true. I think what does need to happen, and it's happened to some extent. So I think Mrs. Thatcher planned some of what she did before going into office. But I think given the scale of the problem now, there needs to be 2 years of planning ahead of entering a government to prepare for what needs to be done.
How do you assess the state of the Conservative Party today? I know it's a bold and broad question, but it's
I did describe the election result of survival of the wettest. And what happened was, frankly, Reform took out a lot of our best MPs, like Jacob Rees-Mogg. The problem is there are too many Conservative MPs who want to keep the status quo. If you look at the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, he supports the Office of Budget Responsibilities. When I was Prime Minister, he used that to have a go at me. He supports the Bank of England. He doesn't want any change to the system. And I think
Do you think they're just playing a political game, knowing the structures that will get them into power need to be cosseted? And if you want to get into power, you can't say to the powerful levers that get you there.
Well, maybe that was one of the mistakes I made, as being clear. I was a critic of the Bank of England before I got in. But I think if you do want to achieve major change, you've got to signal it to the electorate. You can't just say, I'm going to do nothing and go in and do a radical programme, because you wouldn't get it through the House of Lords. There will be all kinds of problems. I think it's genuinely the case that many Conservatives are still attached to the status quo. And that's a problem, because the public are changing. The public are getting increasingly rebellious about what's happening in this country. And we haven't talked about issues like free speech, the fact that people are being locked up for putting things on X, the fact that the grooming gang scandal is still not really, there's now a national inquiry, but it's been covered up for years and years. People know that Britain isn't working and they want serious change. So my view is, unless the Conservative Party actually has that critique of what went wrong for the last 14 years, people are not going to vote for them.
I think people forget that you actually came into cabinet in 2014, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so you had this kind of 8-year period before becoming PM, actually. And so you've seen this really interesting data set of the Conservative Party over the years. Just to put it in context, how does today's strength of the Conservative Party compare to the prior decade or so?
The issue was with the Conservative Parliamentary Party. I became an MP in 2010, and even then there were many MPs who you would not describe as being genuine Conservatives. I think it's got worse. I think the situation's got worse, and I think the candidate selection process has been run in a way that's weeded out people who are genuine Conservatives. I think that's a huge problem.
Why does it weed out people who are genuine Conservatives?
Because in the same way as institutions like the Treasury and the Bank of England have been captured by woke ideology like DEI and climate change, so is the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party has as well. So, there's a lot of, as I've said, weeding out of people who are Conservatives, which is why many Conservative members have ended up defecting to Reform, because they're not getting the Conservative values. And what am I talking about here? I'm talking about things like, do you think the Human Rights Act should be repealed and the ECHR should be left? Do you think that net zero should be abandoned? Do you believe in free speech? I'm afraid a lot of these laws that are being used now were introduced by a Conservative government.
You said kind of woke ideology around climate change and DEI. Climate change in particular is one where people feel very strongly. Why do you think that's woke ideology?
Well, I think the pursuit of net zero in Britain has made our energy costs huge. Energy costs 4 times in Britain what it does in the United States. It's essentially deindustrialized our country. We're struggling to keep things like steel plants alive. It's very damaging for the tech industry, which requires a lot of energy. And it's achieved absolutely nothing, because China and India are busy building coal-fired power stations. So that's just, it's like an emperor's new clothes thing of saying we're showing global leadership and no one's following, and we're damaging our economy and no one will tell the truth about that. That's why it's a woke ideology. And it's no surprise that Greta Thunberg, who was the poster girl for all that stuff, has now gone off to be the poster girl for, pro-Gaza, anti-Western. It's an anti-Western civilization ideology that managed to inveigle its way into the mainstream.
On the DEI side, how do you feel about that? Again, we've had this kind of seemingly massive swing back towards a much more conservative-minded approach towards DEI from the massively liberal that we were in before. How do you feel about where we are now around DEI?
Well, I don't think it's actually changed that much. I think President Trump has changed it significantly in America, but all the public sector in Britain is still recruiting all these DEI jobs. There was a recent case where I think it was West Yorkshire Police were not recruiting new officers who were white. So the idea that the DEI agenda is gone is not true.
What would you do with DEI? Because
Get rid of it.
Just get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Get rid of it. I mean, I felt that we reached a kind of sweet spot probably in the 1990s where we'd got rid of all the discrimination. So all the egregious stuff where women weren't being taken on for jobs or they were being paid less for a job. We got rid of all of the sort of people discriminating on the basis of race. We'd got rid of a lot of that stuff. But we hadn't got into this obsession with identity culture, an obsession with whether you're black, whether you're a woman, whether you're gay. And that was the sweet spot. And we've now gone beyond that.
Do you feel women are still discriminated against today when it comes to opportunity, especially in the workforce?
Look, I think there are cases where people are treated differently because they're women, or people are treated differently because they're, from a particular background. But I'd say, broadly speaking, we live in a meritocratic society, and trying to fix every problem and believing the government can fix every problem is worse than having a society that is more free. I'd rather live in a free society. And people make judgments about people on all kinds of bases, don't they? Mm-hmm. What you're wearing, what you look like, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can't remove all that. And I think by trying to sort of put everybody into a box, I mean, this ludicrous situation in Birmingham where they insisted that bin men were paid the same as dinner ladies, and it's bankrupted the council. That's when you sort of just obsess about somebody's sex or race or religion rather than their qualities as a human being, you get into all these absurdities, and that's where we are now.
What would you do to remove this woke ideology that seems so ingrained in a lot of Britain?
We repeal the Equality Act, which the Equality Act 2010 is another example of bad Blair Brown legislation. Repeal that, for starters. And, the more you get rid of the constraints on what people can do, and you allow freedom for businesses, you allow freedom for families, you get away from this woke ideology. Because our country isn't growing in any way, economically, socially, we're not headed in the right direction. It's turned into a fight for resources between different groups. When you have an economy that's flourishing, when you have a country where people can afford to start a family, when you have a place where people want to be, and we're talking about people leaving, talented people are leaving this country. When you have a place people want to be, then you create those positive conditions, and people are no longer fighting for resources, they're looking for opportunities.
Do you feel the current media landscape does more to harm or to help the woke ideology?
Well, I think the BBC is a massive problem and is a perpetuator of woke ideology. A lot of the mainstream media are as well. And I think the sort of the new media that's emerging is a challenger to that.
I'm intrigued. You also said about kind of the grabbing at resources from different components and how that doesn't happen in a flourishing ecosystem. Which flourishing ecosystem do you look to and learn from?
I think there are things we can learn from Israel. I think is a very exciting country with a lot of very high-tech industry. I think there are elements of the United States where industry is growing and being attracted. There are elements of things in Japan that I like a lot. I think they've got a very good healthcare system. So I think we can look around the world and see these are places that are successful in particular areas that are attracting people where people want to be.
Kind of the one undeniable rise is the rise of China. You said about the US. When you kind of stack rank China versus the US on every metric, China is crushing the US, whether it's the size of the Navy, whether it's, the auto industry, whether it's, bluntly, the AI industry, which we've seen really come to the fore. China is more powerful and outpacing everyone faster than ever. How do you feel about that today?
Well, I don't think China has won, and I don't think they will win. I think ultimately the US will win.
Why do you not think
and
China
the US
will?
kind of friendly network of countries. Why do I think they won't win? They've got a huge demographic problem. They've also got a problem with innovation because it is such a controlled society. And ultimately, I believe free societies are more successful, better, people are more fulfilled, they can prosper and flourish. I think the problem is for the last 40 years, China has been appeased. I think it was a huge mistake letting China into the World Trade Organization. They've used it as an opportunity to steal intellectual property, to cheat the system. And I think Trump is absolutely right to be taking them on through tariffs and through a tougher approach that he's following. But I think they are the genuine threat. I'm very concerned about radical Islam, particularly here in Britain. But on a global scale, China is clearly the threat.
How have they cheated the system?
Well, I talked about intellectual property theft, things like state-subsidized industries, pushing products into markets. So the steel industry is a very good example of where the Chinese have cheated the system. They haven't been transparent about what they're doing. I think one of the things we discovered during COVID is obviously there was huge failure to actually notify the world what was going on, but we also discovered that lots of supply chains ultimately ended up in China.
If we look at free market economics, so we have companies like Uber, which are heavily subsidized by VCs like me. Is that not just the same when you look at the Chinese car?
No, because you're not a state actor with powers to imprison people. You're a VC.
No, I'm not imprisoning people. No.
And if you were, that would be a criminal enterprise. The point is, it's very different because you are, a VC is an operator in a market. You do not have the powers of the state that the Chinese government have. What the Chinese government have done is they have created companies that are not really companies. They're essentially arms of the state.
Sure.
And they have the state power that goes with that. That's a very different thing from a private enterprise.
When you look at the rise of BYD, Xiaomi, and the Chinese car industry, it is astonishing. Are we too far down that road in terms of Chinese penetration of the European car market to actually reverse it at this point?
No, I don't think it's ever too late. And I think particularly with, if you look at things like critical minerals, I think we need to make sure that we, and by that I mean the West, have alternative suppliers that are not dependent on China. So I think we can do all of those things now. Do I advocate cutting off trade with China altogether? No, I don't. But I think the problem is, things like the net zero policy that leads to lots of solar panels is a stupid policy in many ways because we're also benefiting Chinese industry and some pretty dubious practices in China, including what's going on in the Xinjiang region. So I think we should be much more aware of what we're trading with them, what we're doing with them. And I've advocated for the idea of an economic NATO, which is where America, Europe work together to make sure we're not handing over the best technology, to make sure our products aren't being used to coerce the Chinese population. I think that's very important.
Would you ban TikTok out of interest?
Yeah. I'm never quite sure whether it's banned or unbanned. I know Trump tried to ban it. No, Trump tried to ban it, didn't he? But then it was unbanned.
Oh,
I'd like to see it not under the control of the Chinese government. I think that's fair. But I think it's unrealistic to say the UK as a entity can really ban very much.
What makes you say that? We can ban it for our citizens.
It's pretty hard.
Technologically, we could do that very easily.
I'm slightly reluctant to. Yeah, I am a free speech advocate, so I'm slightly reluctant to ban products in that way.
You mentioned tariffs and Trump. Help me understand why you thought that was a strategically good move. Because for me, it just seemed like a tax on the American people, increasing the cost of goods and increasing inflation. I didn't understand why that was a strategically good move.
Because China has been violating the World Trade System, as we've discussed, dumping products, state-subsidized products, etc., etc. We need to change that in some way. Now, tariffs are a tool that can be used to change that. We did, sanctions on Russia as a, pushback against the appalling war in Ukraine. So I think tariffs can be used to do that, and essentially to make it harder for companies to run a supply chain that's entirely dependent on China.
But does it not fundamentally harm the American people and cause more damage than it does good? If you look at
that's the kind of Ricardian view of trade. But we are not dealing with free market actors. We're dealing with a coercive totalitarian regime that wants to take over the world. And it might not be economically perfectly efficient in the short term, but what would be a disaster is if China becomes the global power. And we're still in a situation where the United States is the global power. I don't want that to change in the next 20 or 30 years. So yes, of course, with any policy like that, there could be economic harm in some way. But I still think the price is worth it.
Do you, when you look at something like Walmart with over 1 million employees, providing the goods and services they do to hundreds of millions of Americans, bluntly being put out of business if the tariffs have their full force?
I don't think Walmart is going to be put out of business.
I mean, their CEO said they would be inoperable.
Well, of course he would, because he doesn't want the tariffs.
But I mean, they are 8% margin.
He would say that, wouldn't he?
But if you think about 8% margin business like groceries, I mean, fuck, groceries is hard.
Walmart is not going to be put out of business by the tariffs.
You don't think so?
No, I don't.
We shall see on the levels that they get imposed on.
But at the moment, for example, we have huge tariffs on all kinds of products. So we've got tariffs on beef from America. I know there's a small quota that's been agreed on this trade. Your logic would be, we'll just get rid of all those tariffs tomorrow. Let's have completely free trade. We don't have that. We have a status quo that has a lot of tariffs in the system already.
Is there anything that we should change about our tariff system?
I mean, I'm in favour of signing more trade deals. That's the best way, because then you get the other side to reduce their tariffs as well, which is what's been done with the United States. I'm in favour of doing more of those types of deals with the right kind of countries. I wouldn't do one with China.
Who do you think is the best that we should be trying to do trade deals with?
The best
countries to be partnering with. We've seen trade deals done with India recently.
Well, I think there are all kinds of countries that we could potentially do deals with. I think Southeast Asia is very interesting. We could do more trade with them. I think there's more opportunity in South America. Let's do a trade deal with Argentina. The reason I have optimism about Britain is Argentina was a basket case. It was a basket case. And we might be close to basket case status, but Milei shows that these things can be turned around. He shows they can be turned around. The
only thing that worries me is I think Argentina still wanted to work. I don't feel people in the UK want to work. I genuinely don't.
I don't agree with you about that.
You don't think
I don't agree with you.
You think we still have incredible work ethic that can mean increased
I think the work ethic has been hammered by how high taxes are, how big the government is, how difficult it is to do anything in this country. But I believe that people do want to work and they want this country to be a success. There just needs to be a kind of a plan, a movement to show people how that can be achieved. People need hope. They need hope. And that is what Milei gave people in Argentina. It was hope that things could be different. Because Argentina was in a position where people didn't want to work. They had rampant inflation. They had all of the problems you're just talking about.
Another amazing one is El Salvador. Most incredible turnaround, especially on a crime ratio. You mentioned a concern around radical Islam in certain parts of the UK. What can be done to change this, help to mitigate the concern? What would you like to see done?
Well, banning cousin marriage, I think, would be a very obvious step. Cracking down on the grooming gangs, genuinely cracking down on them. And that requires much better accountability in the police. I think it's shocking what's been going on in some of these places. And there's clear evidence of corruption. That needs to be rooted out straight away. I'm a supporter of the National Inquiry, but one of my concerns is that it shouldn't stop things being done now to actually examine what's going on. We can be much tougher on who we let into our country. We should not be letting Iranian terrorists into our country. That means repealing the Human Rights Act. It means leaving the ECHR. We've just got to do all that stuff.
Repealing the Human Rights Act?
Yes.
Now I am naive, but that feels like an incredibly bold decision to do.
Why?
Well, I mean, surely if you repeal the Human Rights...
Were you alive? Maybe you weren't alive in the 1990s, actually. Were you alive?
I was born in 96.
Well, there you are.
So if
you only had 1 year before, or maybe 2 years before the Human Rights Act.
It was a great
What were your human rights like then? I mean, people were not suffering from a lack of human rights in the 1980s and the 1990s in Britain, were they?
I presume not.
No, they weren't.
So if you
They weren't. But who's getting all the human rights now? The answer is, the foreign rapist who's not being sent back to his own country because of his human rights to family life. That's what these human rights are being used for in the Human Rights Act. They're not being used to protect hard-working, law-abiding British citizens.
Okay, so we'd repeal the
have you ever used the Human Rights Act for anything you've done?
No.
For any violation of human rights? No, exactly.
No, I haven't.
It's like,
I've also never been asked that question.
This is what Labour is so good at doing, or Blair in particular, is making everybody think all this stuff is nice. Human rights are nice. The Equality Act 2010 is nice. Isn't dealing with climate change nice? But what has been done is a cat's cradle has been created of all this terrible legislation that has actually been weaponized by people who hate us. It's been weaponized by the green activists, by the human traffickers. That's who's weaponized human rights law and environmental law. It's not been used to help us. It's been used to harm us. I mean, there are other issues like the Refugee Convention and so on, but so why wouldn't people want to repeal that?
I think they'd feel naturally that there would be wider ramifications, that people who do have human rights situations where it does help would then suddenly be in a situation where they don't have any support.
But you've just asked why things in Britain don't change.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason things don't change.
Well, listen,
because everything that would change things, somebody's got an objection to. We have to get over that.
Well, I'm just wondering to what extent is the very negative, very bad case, the grooming gangs, which are all terrible, but that's like an anomalous thing, which is terrible, but there are many other good cases.
I do not believe that human rights in Britain have got better since 1997. I just don't believe it. I think the country's got worse. I think it has.
It was funny, Jacob said something very smart on the show. I said, what does London become? He said, London becomes very much like it was in the 70s and 80s in the next 5 years. Just tired. There's no great, terrible disaster. It's just tired and weary, and there's a lack of investment, lack of infrastructure. Do you agree with him?
Well, I didn't really come to I'm from Leeds, so I didn't really come to London in the 70s and 80s. I didn't really know what it was like. I first came here in the 1990s, and London was on the up then, definitely.
We talked about China. In terms of Russia, who do you think poses a bigger threat, China or Russia today?
China.
Over Russia?
Definitely. Although you've got to see that Russia are basically an ally of China. You've got China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. That's the axis of authoritarian regimes. So Russia are a junior partner of China.
When you dealt with Putin, how was that?
Well, I never met Putin. I dealt with Sergei Lavrov, who's his foreign minister and sidekick. I mean, they're just unpleasant. They just lie. They're barefaced liars.
Do you think we should continue to support Ukraine?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes.
Do you think we should support Trump in now his fight against Iran?
Well, it doesn't seem like the British government have been consulted about it. And I don't blame the Americans for not consulting the British government, because the government has, attacked, had a go at Israel. They've criticised the ministers. They have not shown whose side they're on. So I don't blame the US. And it's clear, frankly, they don't need Britain to be able to support Israel in the region.
Do you think Trump really cares what Europe thinks about what he does?
Well, it depends how you... So I think Trump cares deeply about the future of Europe. I think he cares deeply about the future of Britain in particular. His mother's Scottish. He feels a very big connection to our country. He's got a lot of his golf here as well. So I think he cares on that level, but I think he absolutely can't stand the European elites and the European Union, socialists like Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, etc. They're all part of a elite that have not really stood for making their countries better. That's the problem. They're too busy, pursuing international human rights law to actually care about what happens on the streets of Rotherham or on the streets of, Newcastle.
What should the UK be doing then to foster a better relationship with Trump, where we do feel a much tighter alignment? I think there's never been...
Get rid of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. That would be a good start. I don't think it's likely to happen until 2029, but we've got a government that are antithetical to everything President Trump stands for.
Bluntly, you said that it won't happen until 2029. If there was an election today, do you not think Labour would win again?
No, they wouldn't.
Who would win?
Well, if you look at the opinion polls, Nigel Farage.
Do you really think he would?
I don't know.
That's my point.
I think Labour would not win.
I think you have Labour, you have the Conservatives.
Do you think Labour would win?
Of course they would.
Really?
Of course. And
really?
Absolutely. And in 2029,
you're spending too much time in London.
And in 2020,
that's why.
And in 2029,
if you go outside London, you will not find any Labour supporters.
Really?
I think they're all within about 10 square miles of where we are now. What's happened in British politics is it used to be the case that the more well-off voted Conservative and the less well-off voted Labour. That has completely changed. What is happening is people who, broadly speaking, support the kind of globalist worldview. What do I mean by that? I mean human rights law, worrying about climate change, believing in transgender ideology, thinking the EU is a great thing. Those people are now what the Labour Party represents. And then you've got people who you describe as more nationalists, who support things like controlling borders, low taxes, reindustrialising Britain. Those are another group of voters. Now, the Labour Party has got, that is their voter base now, the globalist voters. The Liberal Democrats are in that camp as well. And there's a whole bunch of people that want something different. If you like, they're the British equivalent of the Trump voters. The British equivalent. And the question is, who is going to represent those voters? Is it going to be Nigel Farage and Reform, or is it going to be the Conservative Party? But those are the two voter groups, the people that voted for Brexit. And if you want to look at the electoral landscape, the seats that will vote for that party are all the seats that voted for Brexit. Mm-hmm. It's places like Lincolnshire, Norfolk, Yorkshire. It's not places like Surrey or Oxfordshire. Those are the two voter blocks. So the only question I think is, I don't think Labour will win the next election. But the question is, who can win over those nationalist-minded voters? That's the question.
What do you think the Conservative Party should do in terms of their relationship with reform?
Well, what I think the Conservative Party should do is very clearly seek to be a Conservative Party again that believes in low immigration, low taxes, freedom of speech, believes in things like the family, is not beholden to transgender ideology. That's what the Conservative Party should do. And I think that's the way of winning over those voters, which is, it's kind of similar to the Boris coalition, and it's similar to the voters Boris went after. That's what the Conservatives should do.
How likely do you think that is to happen?
Well, I think there's as I said at the start of this, there's a difficulty with who's in the Conservative Parliamentary Party and whether they want to go in that direction. But I think that is the direction the Conservative Party needs to go in to win over those voters. Because I think all the voters that love the public sector, that love net zero, that love human rights, they're taken. That's Keir Starmer's voters. They're already taken.
Do you think Kemi will be there in 2029?
I honestly don't know.
You don't?
I just don't know. And I think I know people love obsessing about the Conservative Party leadership. I know this from my own position. But is what the party represents is more important. It's like, whose side are we on? Are we on the side of patriotic Britons, or are we on the side of the sort of the human rights lawyers?
But I think that's the biggest problem that Kemi's had or kind of bluntly engaged with, which is people don't know. She hasn't laid out really any plans.
But this is because the party is inherently split. This is because there are some MPs on each side of the argument.
And so she's unwilling then to alienate one of them by presenting...
Well, I think she's in a difficult position.
Do you?
Yes. Of course she is. And it was, when I won the leadership against Rishi Sunak in 2022, that's exactly the split then. It was the same split.
And you felt the difficulty of that split inherent within the party?
Yeah, of course I did. Because, the minute I became Prime Minister, I then had all the people that supported Rishi Sunak having a go at me.
So then what would you advise Kemi, having been through what she's going through?
I think she needs to set out a very clear agenda now on all of those issues, and don't take any prisoners. The British public are fed up of politicians who go along with a status quo, who don't rock the boat. And the person that wins the next election is the person who's going to be credibly delivering real change.
Would you like to do a comeback into much more public life in terms of...
Well, I'm on this podcast, what do you I want to change Britain. It's what motivates me. I think, though, that there's a bigger problem than just politics. We need to change the media landscape. We need to create much more of a political movement that involves farmers, business people. A much wider group is needed to change Britain. So I am not sad not to be involved in party politics at the moment, because I think that there's a much bigger, and this is why I wrote my book 10 Years to Save the West, is I wanted to explain to people what the problems are with our country and how big the change needs to be, and for more people to take up that mantle.
Final one before we do a quick fire. We see more and more the importance of defence spending and spending on defence. I think Keir Starmer's committed to 5% of GDP by 2035. How realistic do we think these increases in defence spending actually are? And is that enough given the timeline of these spending increases and the proximity or time closeness of war?
I don't believe he's spending enough. I don't believe he really will spend any more, because there's huge pressure. There's going to be huge pressure on public spending. I think there will be a financial crisis in the next few years. We talked about the gilt rates, which are much higher than they were in 2022. The tax revenues are not coming in. There's going to be even more budget pressure. I think defence will not get the money that they are being pledged. I regret that, but I don't think it's going to happen. And, yes, I think we're in a very dangerous situation. And all European governments there's been a complete dereliction of duty, which is why Russia felt able to do what they did in Ukraine, because we weren't protecting ourselves enough. It's very worrying.
Can I ask, who do you respect most within European leadership?
Giorgia Meloni, I think, is doing a good job in Italy.
Why do you say her?
Because she is actually dealing with these issues like migration. She's taking on the European Union. Italy used to be a country that replaced its prime ministers every 5 minutes. I think maybe we've now got their mantle. But I think she's doing a good job. I mean, entrepreneurs who were in Britain are now moving to Italy. So she's clearly got a tax policy which is attracting business, attracting economic opportunity. But I think there isn't a great, there is a real dearth in France in particular, but right across Europe, of leadership. And the European Commission seems to have just sort of sucked the blood out of a lot of the political life, the political bloodstream.
Well, listen, I want to do a quick fire. So I say a short statement. You give me your immediate thoughts, okay? So what tax would you scrap tomorrow?
Inheritance tax.
Why?
Because I just think it's incredibly damaging to have taxed people already and then not allow them to sort of pass on what they've earned.
It's funny. It's the single biggest reason. I speak to many billionaires who are leaving. It's the single biggest reason over income tax, cap gains, or everything else. Inheritance tax is 95% of the reason why. That is it for everyone leaving. It's fascinating. I'm surprised by that, but it's fascinating. Who in your cabinet smashed it first and why?
It wasn't a very long time to judge them over. I think Jacob did a fantastic job.
Who in your cabinet turned out to be a passenger?
There's quite a few of those. I won't name names.
Do you know who suggested that one? Grant Shapps. Okay. What's one jaw-dropping moment from behind the number 10 curtain?
There were quite a few jaw-dropping moments.
Well,
I think the death of the Queen was probably it wasn't really a jaw-dropping moment as a sinking feeling that was happening.
How long into it was it? That was like
2 days. 2 days. And there were a lot of jaw-dropping moments, but that was the...
Which role in government did you learn the most from when you think about the 8 years prior?
I mean, I learned the most from being Prime Minister.
Despite, respectfully, the short time?
Yes, yeah. Because...
was it what you thought it would be?
No.
How is it different?
No. I think the thing is, the jobs I'd had before, I'd always thought that the reason I couldn't get things done was in some way coming from number 10. And then when I got to number 10, I saw the barriers to actually doing anything. And that was quite shocking because it's like the Wizard of Oz opening a curtain, finding there's nothing behind it. That was what it was like.
It's a sad moment.
Well, maybe I'm a terrible optimist, but I don't see it as sad so much as revelatory. Like, I now, having worked in 6 different government departments, I've now seen the whole system. Like, I understand the whole system now. And I understand why it doesn't work.
If you could give advice to Rachel Reeves today, if she was listening, what would you give her advice-wise?
I'd say abolish the Office of Budget Responsibility.
Number one piece of advice. What's the biggest economic opportunity in the UK right now? We've talked a lot about problems. If you think about positives and opportunities, what's the biggest economic opportunity?
I think the most immediate thing that would have an effect is fracking. That would really just make energy a lot cheaper, and that would propel a lot of opportunities. I think the tech sector is a huge opportunity, and we should just be getting a much bigger slice of the action.
What did you not do that you wish you'd done when you were in number 10?
Well, it's quite a long list of things.
What's number 1?
There isn't really all the things I wish I'd done.
Can I ask you a really stupid question?
Are kind of policy things. So really sort out the grooming gangs or, cut corporation taxes, things like that.
When you get in, are you just like bombarded with phone calls from different global leaders? And it's like, oh, fucking hell. Yeah, hi, Emmanuel. Oh, God.
That's all that's all set up by the civil service. So they will say, yeah, we've had these requests for phone calls. We think you need to do this, this, and this. So, yes.
And you literally just sit and take one after the other. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, you schedule them in.
Yeah.
You schedule them in. So, yeah.
Are they all the same? Like, does anyone just call for a good chat?
No, because everything you do like that is listened into. So I would have sort of text exchanges with people who I knew already and things like that, where you have more informal chat. But so much of it is choreographed and managed.
That's not very exciting, is it? I was hoping Georgia Maloney, come to Italy, have a party, it's great. Oh, no, not happening. Okay, if we speak in 2030, where would you want Liz Truss to be then? It's 5 years away.
I don't really have any firm views of 5 years ahead.
Do you not plan for the future in terms of I want to be here at this date, I want to have...
Well, maybe I do and I'm just not telling you.
It's very fair. This is the business of politics. It'd be naive to think...
What I feel is that having done what I've done and experienced what I have, I understand how the system doesn't work and I want to help fix it. So I want to be in some way helping do that. And I hope by 2030 that we'll have got rid of Keir Starmer. But I also hope we'll be on the way to really dismantling the current British system that has been such a disaster for our country. So that's what I want to happen. And as to my role in that, well, I'm here to help.
We'll see. Listen, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Great to meet you.